Hey coaches. So today we're going to be looking at decision-making frameworks. This is a visual tool that can be used either physically as you print out some sort of framework you've created or a blank template that you can use, or you can use it digitally, and that's what I'm going to be demoing during the class session and also semi-demonstrating here with this video. The essence of this idea is, how do we take the coaching experience and put it on a sheet of paper for the coach and client to explore together and to be able to reflect on as a whole. So it's like what I like to call a coaching canvas. We're going to paint the ideas with the clients onto the sheet, and then we're going to take a step back and look at what we've created and what learning can be there. This is not a replacement of coaching, but it is meant to facilitate the coaching process. So, and you'll hear me say this with practically anything in coaching, that a tool is only there to facilitate the coaching process. As you're going through some sort of decision-making framework, you can always pause, ask additional questions that are outside the scope of the framework or the canvas. That's encouraged, and you can just stop the entire exercise if you and the client feel like it's a good idea to switch. So let's get into things and first revisit the idea of like these decision-making elements. And I'm going to have a PDF version of these slides, which is essentially, these are all workable slides that you could print out, especially as you get further down on the blank template ones like these. I'll also have a Keynote version, which is Mac's version of PowerPoint, as well as, of course, a PowerPoint that you can use to edit things yourself. And part of the pieces you would put into the top here and on the sides here are going to come from this list of elements. So you'll be able to see this in the files that I'll share. So elements, we've already looked at these for the most part. Outside of the elements video, you might see things like questions to answers, a bit new, location, finances. These are parts of facts, but they're also a bit of opinion. If you think about a student who's looking to go to college, what location would they be in? So it's an additional aspect. Finances, additional aspect or element to a decision-making process, perhaps. So it's also impact and legacy. Very similar to the idea of purpose, but has that little bit of a different flavor to it. I especially like the idea of legacy when coaching someone around retirement, that kind of thing. These that are bolded, I like to highlight here as the main elements that I will show you on the left side. So if you look here, these on the left, I often will put as either time, the various options, which what I mean there's option A, B, C, D, like company A, B, C, D, or degree that I want to pursue, like which MBA do I want? Well, there's 4 options. Okay, well, here are the 4 options that we list out here. It could be other people's perspectives. We'll look at how these can all be mixed and matched. Let's look at the frameworks, though, to make it more tangible. So the way this would work is the client is bringing up in an agenda setting that they have a decision to be made, and they have a variety of options to choose from, and they're not sure how to choose between them. In this case, we might toss in so they're interested in 4 different companies. They are going to be interviewing with them, but they want to have thought thoroughly about, what is their interest level with each of these ahead of time. So we've got the 4 options. We put probably the company names here. And then the coach and the client, or the coach, could offer this decision-making framework to help flesh out the decision. In this case, the coach has suggested that we look at some raw facts and data that the person knows, the intuition, what the person senses, and questions they'd like to answer in order to have a bit more clarity, to connect between the facts and the intuition. So pretty simple little framework, and yet it can be very powerful. So you go through option A, the size of the company is a bit large. They're very well established. Intuitively, they feel like they might not have a soul, not sure, but it doesn't feel like it has much of a soul in comparison to a startup they've worked with before. So the questions I'd like to be able to answer, what is it like to onboard there? What feedback process do they have for new hires and so on? how this would work for the coach would, through direct communication, say, hey, as you're describing this decision, I would suggest that we might take a look at a framework that we can build together to help you put your thoughts out on paper or on a sheet. I can send it over to you after our session or hand it to you if you're doing it physically. And you can kind of take a look at it as a whole, all your ideas on the paper together, and see what the entire picture of the decision looks like by the end of the process. How does that sound to you? And so at that point, you'd partner around the design, or you'd offer this particular design. And then you'd coach, and you'd ask questions for each of these. Let's get to option B, company B, in this case, and facts. So what are some things you know about company B? So facts, what do you know about company B? When you think about company B and you read their marketing or any interactions you've had with them so far, what do you sense about them? What's your gut feeling about the company? This is a little bit different from emotions. It's like that gut reaction, gut feeling. And then further, as you consider, or as you prepare for the interview, what questions do you want to have answered before getting to that interview? And that's it. So you just keep filling this out. By the end, they'll have all these kind of filled out, not with the exact same thing as we're doing here, but you get the idea. So they have this all filled out. And then you get to say, so go down this line. What are you learning as you see your thoughts laid out here? This is the point. The point isn't filling out the sheet. Having a filled out sheet's great. The person can print it out. They can have it handy. They can look at it. It can be a reminder for them. They can maybe say, this, like these things, or like, let's say these questions are actually the most important for me to answer. So I'm going to highlight them or something. I'm going to get my highlighter and highlight a physical copy. Maybe the coach will just bold these. And so it can be a great reminder for him. But the real point of this is to step back and say, what are you learning about the decision? What are you learning about yourself as you see all these thoughts laid out here? As you are following along with me, I want to acknowledge the fact that I'm moving fairly fast on the keyboard work here. And I don't want anyone to feel too overwhelmed with the idea of typing all of these things in as we go. What we normally do is maybe do some copy and paste to some text bubbles or create our own text bubbles and put in some information here. It doesn't have to be all super pretty or super organized. It's more about offering a space for discussion. You can also just type in the information in this way. So if you're using a PowerPoint or a Keynote, you can just click into these cells and fill it in. But it's okay, completely okay, if you do this on a blank sheet and just write in, and maybe even take a little picture of that sheet of paper and send it over if you're doing things digitally, or if you're, of course, physical, for you or the client to have a printed out copy and for one of you to fill it out. Similarly, and as we talked about with like the Wheel of Life, the client, you can send the clients a list of template empty ones ahead of time if they have a decision to be made. Say, hey, maybe have these printed out and we might use one of these as part of the session. They're doing it remotely. You're not there to write in there for them. During the session, they could write in their ideas, similar to the Wheel of Life, how the person that is being coached is writing things out, filling in their own boxes. This video is not meant to direct you for what you should be doing with the idea of a decision-making framework, but this is something that I found extremely useful in my own practice, and I would just like you to consider using it as part of your own. The main reason I love this idea of creating some sort of coaching canvas or visual framework like this is because so much of what is out there in the idea of some sort of like proprietary concepts, proprietary PDFs and systems and frameworks. It's just this. You have various ingredients. The framework becomes a new recipe of that, and you could brand it. You can completely ignore the fact that this has this my stuff on it. You can do whatever you want. This is just a chart. It's just a table. All we're doing here is organizing elements of decision making. I want you as a coach to feel comfortable over time building your own recipe and using that. And further over time, for you to co-create a recipe with a client within a session to be able to do something like this. And whether or not you do it visually is okay, but the ability to see these elements, hear them in a coaching session, and the person wants to be able to talk about their purpose and what they really care about as they think about these companies and how their purpose and their reason for living may match or not match with each of these companies. Like, oh man, that sounds like maybe a 4x3 decision-making framework. I know that sounds really weird to say, like, hey, I'd love for you guys to do that. But in coaching, you will see that as a pattern, especially around decision-making. Like, there are often elements that the client will bring up. You think about the START model of agenda setting, the areas to address. When coaching around a decision in the agenda setting, you ask, like, what elements of this decision are most important for us to explore? What facets of who you are and what the situation is should we most unpack to help you make the decision? Those will bring up these elements, and you can suddenly kind of maybe write those down and think, wow, well, we've got 2 that could go on the left and 4 that can go on the top. Maybe, just as an option, we could consider a visual framework. Otherwise, you can just ask these questions. And a fun thing that a coach can do is to help guide your powerful questions around a thorough decision-making coaching session is to have something like this open for you to, of course, ask permission to use it as a guide for your questions, letting them know that you can deviate from that so that they get the most out of the experience, but that you'll be using some sort of visual to help you organize the discussion. So they want to look at 4 different positions that are now open in the organization that are going to have different requirements. Okay, so we put into here, oh goodness, the text isn't white. Sorry, got to fix that before I send it over to you guys. Different options for next position. And so here I would just say, so as you consider option A, whatever that is, how would that allow you to leverage your strengths effectively? What strengths would you be able to use on a daily basis? What weaknesses will you be expected to utilize? What tasks, I should say, would you be expected to perform that may be in the category of current weaknesses? What areas of development are you most interested in as you look at this particular option? So this is not necessarily saying you need to fix all your weaknesses, but what areas would you be most interested in developing? Option B, how might you be able to leverage your strengths here? What weaknesses would you have to use here? What areas, like what would you be most interested in learning during this work in this position, and so on? After doing all of this, filling it out or just asking these questions, we can simply say, now that you've laid all your thoughts out here in the session, or you see them laid out on this visual framework, what are you learning? What are you noticing? And even more importantly is, instead of just following this like scripted step-by-step process, the coach needs to be willing to during the exploration, hear the shifting that happens. Because often when going through something like this, let's do this one. One of these cells will provide a big aha. So here we have a combination of option A and option B, 6 months out, 1 year out each. So it could be, what if you choose to retire and pursue that hobby What's going to be the impact on you 6 months out? What would be the impact on you 1 year out? And the impact being, what might you learn? What might you be able to do? What might you be able to experience and do and experience? I'm using in a slightly different sense here. So do are the things that you would be actually doing. Experience would be the kind of the holistic life experience. Option B would be, what if you continue to, the other option I've had is like another 5 years of work, looking at longer term impact of the business that this individual had built. What impact would that have, learning, doing, experience, on the next 6 months, year? I'd actually, do I have it here? Probably do 1 year, 5 years in the case I'm thinking about in the moment. But you get the idea. You have this ability to toss in different times and ask the questions. And as you do so, let's just do, I'll do this one. As you do so, asking about what their hopes are, what their dreams are, what the fears are, what the risks are. For instance, in this one, you get over to the fears. The fears would probably be strong in this case of retirement. Let's say a person's considering retiring. The fears are pretty high. The risks are somewhat high, not too much. Fears are pretty high, a year out even. But then you get to this cell and you ask the question. So if you think about 3 years out, what would be your primary fears? What would you most fear at that point? And in this case, the person might say, I think the fears would be gone. Or something like that. Like you hear that shift. You hear that the mind working and realizing something for the first time, that if they push through the first part, the first year, 2 years, then everything changes. At least how it appears to them at the moment. So we could ask, you can stop everything in this moment after they answer this cell or whatever cell, wherever they're having a shift of thought, and say, what are you learning about yourself? What are you learning about this decision, the situation, now that you've come to this point in our conversation? I notice you just laughed quietly to yourself as you answered that question. What are you learning about the decision in this moment? That's really the idea here. It's not just filling out these charts. Again, I'm going to have these as a file so you can look through them in more detail. I really want to stress that these are just options. And I want to look at this one just to talk about the stuff on the left here. This is the idea of different perspectives of other people. So let's say the topic here is, let me switch the text again, delegation, or more director level delegation, like starting this month or something. Just recently got in the position, 3 months in, is recognizing there's a lot of expectations that are requiring him or her to leverage more strategic thought and pause and planning. And they just simply don't have that time because they're in the weeds too much. So we talk about delegation and they're just not sure when to begin the process. Here we can look at what changes for the leader and everyone else if they choose this direction. So what are the challenges for you as an individual, as a leader, in offering more delegation? What could you learn through those challenges? What could you personally achieve if you were to implement delegation more effectively? What impact would you be able to make longer term because of it? What challenges would there be for your direct reports? What could they learn? What achievements could they have as a team, as individuals, because you begin to delegate now? What impact would it make? And so on, your peers, your leadership. You can even make a separate one for beginning the delegation process 6 months out, and then kind of compare the two. But you get the idea. These elements on the left, you add those to the elements on top, and this becomes the coaching algebra process in a way for the entire conversation. Always being open to deviate from just filling out these cells to ask a in-the-moment coaching question, because these are only helping facilitate a deeper coaching conversation. Now let's take a look at these blank templates. So this is what it would normally look like. A very simple exercise here. Let me do this just to demo it. Would be, whatever the decision is, and I could just type into here, what if you do it? What if you don't? What would happen in 1 year? And what would happen in 5 years? So all I'm doing is clicking into them, typing it in. Of course, you could have it printed out and write it in, and then ask the questions. So what would happen, what might happen a year out if you do this thing, if you say yes? Yeah, we can just make it yes, no. This is a very simple framework. And then we can take that further and make it yes, no. What happens in a year for you? What happens in a year for your family? What happens in a year for 5 years for you? 5 years for your family? And if you don't, what happens in this column? Now, it's really important for the coach not to take sides. So kind of what the coach sees is something like this, like, we don't see either of these as the right answer. This isn't, of course, what we type here, but as a coach, I'm going into this conversation not thinking that one of these directions is correct. Let's say that the individual is considering a stay-at-home parent, and they're considering going back to work, and maybe I want them to have the confidence to go back, or I could have the sense of, I think this person would really do best if they stayed home and, built into the lives of their child. Or as a coach, I'm hearing, I really think that this person really does want to stay at home, or I really do think they want to go to work. I can't, as a coach, know that, though. And I need to be very careful, because it's extremely hard, I believe, to separate what we think we are hearing and what we are actually hearing, and what we want for the client. And those things are just a part of our intuition. They can play a role in coaching, but again, when we've talked about decision-making coaching, the voice of the coach needs to be quietest in this. So I need to be very mindful not to just kind of stop the exploration after they've explored the side of the equation, the side of the framework I think they should most explore, because I don't know. These frameworks, in a way, help facilitate that process, because there's an expectation that we'll thoroughly flesh out both sides and then really step back and say, so what did you learn through this exercise? What are you learning as you look at all of your ideas here? Or even if they just done it verbally, what have you realized about the entire kind of decision now that you've said all these things out loud? So looking through these, you'll see there's just a lot of little templates. If you were to go into this using PowerPoint or Keynote, you can just type into them, both the cells and the blocks. So the top would be elements. These would be the time, other people perspective, and various options over here. And all of these would be the other elements. And you can just type those in, ask the questions that fit each cell, and maybe send a copy over to your client. You can always, I don't know exactly how it works in PowerPoint, but you essentially go to File, Save as PDF, or Print, Save as PDF. It depends on what version of Mac or PC you have, Windows you have. Yeah, I hope this is helpful as an idea. I do not want everyone to feel like you have to do this all digitally. So in preparation for the class, I would encourage you to print out the templates and have the openness to use one as part of the exploration. You can also have this part printed out, and I'm going to actually bring this down so you'll find it right about here. And you can just You could just print out this portion if you'd like on the side and print out the elements and have those ready as part of the agenda setting in our practice. And outside of our practice, where everyone's going to be playing nice and talking about decisions, the idea is to have these elements on your radar. And if you hear a pattern of time and some of these other elements, then consider building a chart with your client to help them make a decision by thoroughly looking at it based on a variety of elements. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I am very much looking forward to discussing these ideas in our training and practicing them, demoing them, and carrying on from there. So thank you for coaching. Thank you for being invested in people's lives. When we help them make decisions, it really does open up so much for them in having the confidence in the direction they're taking. So thank you for the work you are doing.